Usually, when you picture a pharmaceutical breakthrough,
Hmm.
you imagine this incredibly high level of precision.
Right, like a pristine laboratory environment.
Exactly. Pristine labs, highly controlled environments, rigid, multi-phase clinical trials, and, an FDA-approved label on a medication like Ozempic that genuinely reshapes global health.
I mean, that is basically the pinnacle of modern regulatory science. It takes, what, a decade of intense scrutiny to get a molecule from a petri dish into an actual pharmacy.
Yeah, a decade and billions of dollars.
Hmm.
But then if you cross over into these online biohacking forums, that pristine image just completely shatters.
Oh, totally. It's a completely different world.
It really is. Instead of a sterile clinic, you're watching like a guy in his bathroom staring into a smartphone camera, injecting this cloudy vial of liquid directly into his abdomen.
And he's doing it because some YouTuber promised it would heal his elbow tendonitis, right?
Exactly. Heal his tendonitis and help him bench press like 105 pounds.
And the craziest part is that the vial he's injecting is legally sold through this massive regulatory loophole. I mean, it literally sports a label that explicitly warns research purposes only, not for human consumption.
It's wild. We are looking at this incredibly volatile gap right now between Nobel Prize-winning medicine and, well, bathroom
Oh,
self-experimentation.
yeah.
So today, we're cutting through the hype surrounding peptides. We've got a massive stack of sources for this deep dive. We're looking at articles from the AAA Science Journal, medical warnings from cardiologist Dr. Eric Topol.
Some really intense warnings there, too.
Very intense. We've also got a crazy 50-day YouTube self-experiment and some high-stakes regulatory debates. Basically, we want to figure out how these molecules became the most sought-after and probably the most highly misunderstood compounds on the internet right now.
Yeah, and to understand how we ended up with this massive underground market, we kind of need to look at the mechanical reality of what a peptide actually is. Because, people are throwing this term around online like it's some magic cheat code for human biology.
Okay, let's unpack this. If we think of the human body as this highly complex biological operating system, a peptide is it's essentially a very specific line of executable code.
I like that analogy.
Right. Because chemically, they're just short chains of amino acids. Basically, anything under 50 amino acids is a peptide. And if it crosses that length, it folds into a more complex protein.
Exactly. But functionally, they are signaling agents. They travel through the bloodstream, they bind to a receptor on a cell, and they trigger exactly one function.
Just one very specific command.
Right. They tell a cell to, say, release a hormone, or to repair a torn tissue, or to alter its metabolism. It is highly targeted communication.
But that precision runs into a massive biological roadblock, right?
Oh, a huge one. Chemist Derek Lowe outlines this perfectly in his Science Journal commentary. The delivery mechanism for peptides is a complete nightmare because of enzymatic cleavage in your gastrointestinal tract.
Because you can't just swallow them in a pill.
No, not at all. Your digestive system is fundamentally designed to destroy peptide bonds.
So it just shreds them.
Literally shreds them. Your stomach acid and your protease enzymes, they don't distinguish between a miraculously engineered pharmaceutical peptide and, like, the dietary proteins in the chicken breast you had for lunch.
Wow.
Yeah, they attack those peptide bonds, severing the amino acid chains, and completely neutralizing the signaling code long before it ever has a chance to cross the intestinal wall and hit your bloodstream.
So oral delivery is basically sending your incredibly expensive medication into a biological wood chipper.
That's exactly what it is. Which is why almost all of these compounds, from life-saving insulin to these fringe biohacker vials, they require injection. You just have to bypass the GI tract entirely.
And the fact that they must be injected kind of sets up this massive division we see in the current market. Because on the legitimate pharmaceutical side, the success is just unprecedented.
Oh, absolutely. The GLP-1 receptor agonists, drugs like semaglutide and tirzepatide, those are FDA-approved peptides that have fundamentally altered obesity and diabetes treatment.
And the mechanism there is brilliant. They mimic a natural satiety hormone to significantly delay gastric emptying. So they basically signal the brain's receptors that you're completely full.
Right.
Plus, and I found this fascinating, the original blueprint for exenatide, which was one of the early GLP-1s, it was isolated from the venom of the Gila monster.
The Gila monster,
Yeah.
which just proves that nature is this incredible laboratory for finding these complex signaling codes.
It really is.
However, those approved drugs are heavily guarded. I mean, they require strict prescriptions, and they can cost upward of $1,000 a month.
And whenever you have a highly effective biological mechanism trapped behind, strict gatekeeping and massive costs, an underground market is just inevitable.
Always.
According to investigations, like the one from the Business of Fashion on UK clinics, you have places charging 350 to 450 pounds a month for unapproved experimental peptide injections.
That's a huge markup for an unapproved compound.
Exactly. And the sheer volume of the raw material is being imported from these massive laboratories overseas, predominantly in China.
And the legal maneuvering here relies entirely on that research chemicals label we mentioned earlier. Vendors sell these vials under the guise of in vitro laboratory research.
Right. Like they're just testing it in a petri dish.
Exactly. They bypass consumer safety and pharmaceutical regulations because legally they are claiming the substance isn't for human use, yet the vendor and the buyer both know exactly where that syringe is going.
But because it operates entirely outside of regulatory oversight, there is zero quality control. You have absolutely no idea if the vial contains a pure peptide, a degraded compound, or like toxic heavy metals left over from a sloppy synthesis process.
Which is terrifying considering up to a third of these gray market vials actually fail independent purity tests.
A third. That's massive. So the biohacking community has actually developed this intense system of folk pharmacology.
Yeah, that's a great term for it.
Users are basically crowdsourcing their own safety data because the government isn't doing it for them. They're pooling their money on Reddit to fund high-performance liquid chromatography and mass spectrometry tests.
It's wild. They buy a random vial from an internet vendor, ship it to an independent analytical lab like Genoshik Analytics over in the Czech Republic, just to verify that the chemical structure matches the label before they inject it.
They are literally acting as their own regulatory agency.
They really are. And when you look at what people are actually doing with these verified vials, it highlights how far this pursuit of physical optimization has actually gone.
Yeah. Manuel Enrique's YouTube channel is the perfect window into this.
Yeah.
He documented a 50-day self-experiment with these gray market peptides. And he wasn't just taking one, he was running multiple compounds simultaneously.
Like a whole stack of them.
Yeah, he used CJC 1295, which is a peptide specifically formulated to stimulate the pituitary gland into releasing more human growth hormone.
And the overarching goal there is, accelerated recovery and muscle synthesis.
Right, and he tracked his metrics meticulously. Within weeks, he records a personal best on his incline dumbbell bench press, pushing 105 pounds for 5 reps, while only weighing 184 pounds himself.
Which is an impressive physical feat. But the experiment also involved a compound called GHKQ.
Yes.
That's a copper peptide known for its skin healing properties. He miscalculated his initial dosing schedule, panicked about losing time, and decided to compensate by injecting the GHKQ directly into the skin of his face.
Which is, just a disastrous misunderstanding of how systemic absorption works.
Totally. You don't need to inject something into the specific area you want it to affect if it's going systemic.
Well, he found that out the hard way. He ended up with massive reactive bruising across his face and had to cancel his dermatological laser treatments because his skin was so severely inflamed.
Ouch.
Yeah, he's his own doctor, and he committed a severe malpractice error on himself. But, he's just one guy. The real cornerstone of this whole underground movement is a combination known as the Wolverine stack.
Right. Named for the Marvel character's rapid healing factor. It pairs TB500 with a peptide called BPC-157. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound. And what's mechanistically fascinating about BPC is its origin. It was originally isolated from a protein found in human gastric juice.
Which sounds bizarre until you think about the extreme environment of the stomach, right?
Exactly.
It's an incredibly corrosive acid bath. The stomach lining needs a potent, constant healing mechanism just to survive its own digestive fluids.
And biohackers have taken that specific healing code and injected it systemically, claiming it can rapidly repair torn ligaments, cure tendinitis, and resolve chronic joint pain in, a fraction of the normal recovery time.
Wait, but let's pause and look at the anecdotal evidence here. Because Manuel actually benched 105 pounds on camera, and I've heard major podcasters swear their elbow tendinitis literally vanished in 2 weeks on BPC 157.
I know, you hear these miraculous stories all the time.
Are we sure this is just internet hype? Because from the outside, it really looks like the gray market is actually delivering biological results that the FDA just hasn't caught up to yet.
What's fascinating here is that you really have to factor in the sheer power of tissue remodeling timelines and the placebo effect. We see this even in legitimate clinical settings.
Really? Like where?
Well, doctors on the family medicine Reddit sub talk about gym goers coming in demanding these compounds, fully convinced they work. But in pharmacology, aggressive belief combined with enforced rest often mirrors chemical efficacy.
Ah, so because they're resting the injury while taking it, they think it's the drug?
Exactly. When we look at the actual data for BPC 157, there are 0 large-scale randomized placebo-controlled human trials proving safety or efficacy. The foundational studies are mostly rodent models.
Right, mice and rats.
Yeah, and often conducted by the exact same small group of researchers. When you inject a compound while resting a torn muscle, you will naturally heal. Pinning that healing solely on the unproven peptide without a control group is a massive scientific leap.
It's a leap of faith, basically. And because there is such a massive gulf between thousands of glowing internet reviews and a total lack of gold standard clinical data, this has erupted into a massive political and regulatory battle.
It really has. In late 2023, the FDA cracked down heavily on this. They moved a large block of popular unapproved peptides explicitly targeting DPC-157 to a restricted list.
Which effectively banned compounding pharmacies from synthesizing them.
Right. Compounding pharmacies usually create custom medications for patients, but the FDA argued these specific peptides lack sufficient human safety data and carry too many potential toxicities to be distributed, even with a doctor's prescription.
But the blowback to that decision has been fierce. I mean, it's bleeding directly into national politics. Figures like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the Make America Healthy Again movement have heavily criticized the FDA's ban.
They've been very vocal about it.
Very. They argue these peptides are vital tools for preventative medicine and rapid healing, claiming the regulatory establishment is actively suppressing cheap, effective treatments just to protect the profit margins of legacy pharmaceutical companies.
And just to interject here for you listening, it's really important to note we aren't taking a side here.
No, absolutely not.
Right. Between the FDA's regulatory framework and RFK Jr.'s political movement, we are entirely neutral. We're just looking at this massive ongoing tension in the medical landscape. We're trying to figure out where exactly you draw the line between individual medical freedom and broad public safety.
It's a huge philosophical divide, and you see it perfectly distilled in a recent debate hosted on the TDPN YouTube channel. It featured Martin Shkreli, the former pharmaceutical executive, against Max Marchioni, who is the CEO of a healthcare startup called Superpower.
Shkreli takes the hardline institutional view in that debate. He argues that the FDA's randomized controlled trials, the RCTs, are literally the only thing separating modern medicine from snake oil.
Which is traditional pharma stance.
Exactly. And he specifically targeted BPC 157, calling it a scam, noting that legitimate pharmaceutical companies have tried and failed to commercialize it in formal trials. His logic is simple. If it works safely, pharma would already be selling it.
But Marchion counters with a really compelling harm reduction argument. He points out that the demand already exists. Millions of patients and thousands of doctors are actively looking for these compounds.
Yeah, the cat is out of the bag.
Totally out of bag. And by banning legitimate regulated compounding pharmacies from producing clean versions of these peptides, the FDA isn't actually stopping their use. They are just driving desperate patients into the arms of unregulated overseas laboratories and sketchy internet vendors.
So Marchion argues that keeping them in compounding pharmacies is the only realistic way to ensure quality control.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The reason the medical establishment is so resistant to that harm reduction approach comes down to the cellular mechanisms themselves.
Yes. When you look at the warnings from experts like cardiologist Dr. Eric Topol or cell biologist Paul Knupfler, their anxiety is deeply rooted in how cellular growth actually functions.
Because telling a cell to grow or build new tissue isn't just like an isolated command. It's more like building a high-speed rail line to revitalize a struggling town, but accidentally connecting it straight to a cartel headquarters.
That is a highly accurate analogy for BPC 157. Its primary proposed mechanism of action is promoting angiogenesis, which is the rapid creation of new blood vessels.
Okay, so it builds new blood supply.
Exactly. And if you have a torn tendon with naturally poor blood supply, angiogenesis sounds like an absolute miracle. It floods the damaged area with oxygen and nutrients to accelerate repair.
But you don't get to tell the peptide where to build those blood vessels once it's freely circulating in your system. What if you have like a microscopic dormant cluster of precancerous cells somewhere else in your body?
That is the catastrophic risk. Tumors are often starved of blood. If you systemically inject an angiogenesis-promoting peptide, you could theoretically build a brand new vascular highway directly to a tumor, feeding it the exact biological nutrients it needs to metastasize.
Wow.
Yeah, you are accelerating the worst possible cellular outcome.
And the growth hormone peptides, like the CJC-1295 that Manuel used for his bench press, they carry a completely different systemic risk.
Right, because they push the pituitary gland to secrete human growth hormone. But growth hormone receptors are ubiquitous. They aren't just localized to your skeletal muscle.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere. They are embedded in your internal organs, your bones, your connective tissues,
It essentially tells your entire biological hardware to scale up.
which can lead to acromegaly. That's a severe condition where the bones in your face, hands, and feet begin to physically thicken and enlarge. It
Ah,
induces massive insulin resistance, joint pain, and cardiovascular strain.
it sounds awful.
It is. The fundamental rule of biology is that you cannot artificially command a cell to grow without assuming the inherent risk of unrestrained growth. And unrestrained cellular growth is literally the clinical definition of cancer.
The stakes with injectables are just incredibly high.
Yeah.
But there's a massive sector of the peptide market that sidesteps systemic injection entirely, and that's topical skincare.
Yeah.
You see this heavily debated in forums like the skincare addiction subreddit.
Oh, definitely. And the chemical challenge here is completely different from digestion. Your skin, specifically the outermost layer, the stratum corneum, is an incredibly effective barrier designed to keep external molecules out.
Right.
And most peptides have a high Dalton weight, meaning the molecule is physically too large to penetrate the skin barrier on its own.
So cosmetic chemists have to engineer delivery systems. They attach fatty acids to the peptides, like they do in the ingredient matrixol, just to help them slip past that lipid barrier.
Yep, they need a Trojan horse.
Exactly. And when they do get in, they aren't triggering massive systemic growth across the body. They are acting as highly localized signaling molecules, basically telling fibroblasts in the dermis to produce more collagen.
Which brings us back to GHK2, the copper peptide that Manuel disastrously injected into his face. In a topical serum, copper is a crucial cofactor. Enzymes in your skin actually require copper to cross-link collagen and elastin fibers, giving the skin its structural integrity and bounce.
But the skincare community is very grounded about the limitations here. They call these peptides supporting actors. You aren't going to erase deep wrinkles overnight.
No, it takes months of consistent use.
And the formulation chemistry is incredibly fragile. Users constantly warn against layering peptide serums with low pH chemical exfoliants or strong vitamin C because the highly acidic environment will literally denature the peptide bonds right on your face before they even have the chance to absorb.
It's a delicate balance. So we have the delivery bottleneck of topicals, the enzymatic destruction in the gut, and the massive systemic off-target risks of the injectable gray market.
It's a lot of hurdles.
It is. And the question is how we move past these limitations. The answer seems to be shifting away from extracting compounds from gastric juice or Gila monsters and moving entirely toward artificial intelligence.
You're talking about the field of generative biology, which honestly sounds like science fiction, but it is heavily funded right now.
It is the next frontier. Think about how large language models predict the next logical word in a sentence based on context. Companies like Evolutionary Scale have built massive models like their ESM3, but instead of training them on human language, they train them on the genetic sequences of 2.78 billion proteins.
So the AI understands the fundamental language of amino acids.
Yes.
It understands how a one-dimensional sequence of amino acids will fold into a complex three-dimensional protein structure.
Precisely. And it allows researchers to perform what's called de novo design. They can prompt the AI to generate a peptide that does not exist anywhere in nature.
Like writing a custom script.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can literally ask the model, design a peptide that binds exclusively to this specific inflammatory receptor, but engineer the molecular bonds so that stomach protease enzymes cannot cleave them and ensure it has zero affinity for cancer-promoting pathways.
That is mind-blowing. We're transitioning from discovering drugs by trial and error in nature to literally compiling biological software from scratch. It solves the oral delivery problem and the off-target toxicity problem simultaneously.
Exactly. It brings the rigorous safety and specificity of traditional pharmaceuticals to the absolute bleeding edge of bioengineering.
So what does this all mean? When we step back, the peptide landscape is fiercely divided right now. On one end, highly regulated, intricately designed pharmaceuticals are fundamentally changing global health.
And on the other end,
On the other end, A massive gray market driven by social media hype, regulatory loopholes, and desperate biohackers is treating the human body like an open-source chemistry experiment. The underlying science of peptides is undeniably the future of medicine. But for you listening, participating in the current underground market means you are rolling the dice with systemic, off-target biological consequences.
Which leaves us with a highly complex final thought to mull over. As generative AI becomes exponentially better at predicting protein folding and designing these custom-built molecules from scratch, will the slow, methodical pace of FDA clinical trials even be able to adapt?
That's a great question.
Or will these AI models inadvertently supercharge the biohacking gray market by giving literally anyone with an internet connection the exact structural blueprint to print their own biological cheat codes?
It's the ultimate tension between rapid innovation and necessary safety. From a perfectly sterile vial of FDA-approved insulin to a biohacker's bathroom laboratory, the code of life is being rewritten in real time. The only question is, who gets to hit execute?